All right. Hey, everybody. I am here with Erick Polsky. Erick is one of our expert analytics and Power BI instructors. He's joined me today so that we can take a peek at some of the features of Power BI and some of the things you can use it for. Erick, how's it going?
Going all right. Things are good.
Great. Glad to hear it. Well, thanks for joining us. And I'd say let's get into it. Now, before you actually show us some demo features here, um, we thought we would just go back and forth on a couple questions about Power BI specifically. And so I thought probably the first one that I want to ask you about is even just aside from Power BI or any other tool, maybe it might make sense. Can you first just kind of explain for a layman like me exactly what we mean when we say BI in the first place?
Yeah. I get this question a lot because there are so many different things that people qualify as business intelligence. And it's difficult sometimes to relate what makes the difference between using Excel and business intelligence. Because the fact is you can do business intelligence with Excel. And there are tons of tools out there, and each of them brings something to the table. But what we're trying to figure out is where's the line, or where is the gradient between these things. And because that's a little difficult to define, I try to do this as a way of thinking about the results instead of thinking about the tool. So what I'm looking for is, if we are using the information to influence a decision that the business is going to make, then it qualifies as business intelligence. There's a ton of data that we're consuming all the time that we need to consume, and we're using it to do things like bill, or to determine how much of something we need in the future. And if the thing that we're doing is billing someone, we didn't really need to make a business decision from that. But if we're determining what amount of inventory we need to maintain in the future as a result of analyzing past data, that qualifies as business intelligence. And we can absolutely do something like that in any number of ways. There's a couple other lines, though, that start making a business intelligence tool different from just doing business intelligence. And the line there is, we're trying to take the things that make it possible to do that analysis and put them in the hands of less technical but more business oriented users. So the folks who understand the business and understand the landscape can go in and explore the information without having to be a computer programmer.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so, in our classrooms, we do see a lot of folks exactly like you described. So, and I'm sure you encounter these people when you're teaching, folks who are in charge of projects or functional team type folks, people who are actually doing work, business analysts, people who probably have access to a lot of data, but they're really actually trying to apply that in some specific way rather than just being responsible for like manipulating and doing things with the data itself. They're trying to get something done. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, and traditionally these folks live in sort of silos, where there's a group of people who are managing servers, there's another group of people who look at the data that's managed on those servers, and there's a group of people who need to make decisions, who use the numbers, but they are separated from that entire process. And so if they have a question about something, they have to go through multiple steps of people and wait for the answer. And we're trying to empower them by saying, look, we have done the work to make the model simple enough and powerful enough that you can go in and start doing exploratory experiments on this data yourself using an interface that's enough like an Office product that you don't require a tremendous amount of training to get started.
Yeah, it makes sense. And of course, learning how to work across silos and get faster about that sort of isolation is a big thing for us here. So why has Power BI itself gotten so popular? I mean, we've really seen a pickup in how many classes we have requested on Power BI.
Yeah, it was actually a little bit surprising to me that we suddenly saw so much interest in Power BI, and I think a big part of the answer is just marketing. Microsoft has done a tremendous job of making this product available and attractive to people through multiple simultaneous efforts. So one of them is the Power BI desktop product that we're going to be playing with It's available to anyone to download for free. We'll talk about pricing and other things later maybe, but the fact that people can go and start doing something with it right now, they just go and download it and play with it, that's very empowering. The fact that it's fairly easy to use and it looks a lot like other Office products means that the barrier to entry is lower for less technical people. They also are including a lot of Power BI services, things that you don't get for free, in the licensing that companies are purchasing with their Office 365 contracts. So the fact that it integrates really well with existing systems and is part of their license, so they've already paid for it, that makes it really attractive when the alternate is something like Tableau, which is relatively expensive to get started with.
Yeah, it makes sense. And of course, we always say half the world's on a Microsoft stack anyway. So um, I'm sure
There's an
that plays a
awful lot
big.
of it out there. And there's a lot of comfort. There's a lot of barriers that are broken down immediately when you say it's already integrated with the tools that we've been paying for.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned the pricing. Why don't you just talk about the cost for a minute? How much does it cost?
Well, Power BI is a bunch of things. So it's not quite so simple to think through this entire hunk of code. It's not one product. There is a thing, Power BI Desktop, that's free, and you can do all of the cool things with it for yourself. But if you want to start sharing that with other people, now what we have to do is host it somewhere, and Microsoft charges you for that hosting. And that's one of the main ways that they're going to make money from this. They're going to look at the way that the business wants to take this data and bring it from one person's personal knowledge out to the organization. Getting that data in front of the people is something folks are going to be willing to pay for. So the pricing for this is, if you're just going to do it for yourself with Power BI Desktop, that's free. But if you want to share it with other people, for you to host it, you need to connect to their hosting system, and that's $9.99 per month per user. The people who want to consume this report, they need to connect to that same server. They need to pay $9.99 a month. So for a large organization, this can really add up quickly, but not everyone in the organization necessarily needs access to this. So you can scale the pricing slowly over time by adding in just the people who need it. And then if you decide that this is something you want everyone in the organization to have, they have these really excellent ways to bundle the pricing of this with your Office 365 subscription. So for a lot of organizations, it feels like it's free because they start with the Power BI free desktop edition, and then they bundle it with their licensing for Office, and it wound up just being that everyone now has access to it for free. But it's not really free. We're paying somewhere in there for that. If you need something above and beyond what the pro level gives you, you need a specific hardware resources to deal with large amounts of data crunching. They also have a premium level, and that is actually a sliding price, but it starts at $5,000 per month.
Ah, freemium with in-app purchases.
That's it. That's it exactly. And they've brilliantly marketed this where you can get started and you can do some really powerful things and show them off to other members in the organization for free. Once that happens, once you put that effort in, $9.99 doesn't seem like a very large barrier to start sharing it with other people.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So you were just talking a little bit about some of the features, and you're going to show us some of those actually here in just a second. Just one more question, I guess. There's some pretty neat peer products out there in the market. I'm thinking specifically of Tableau and tools like Click, and then we've got some other up and coming tools like Snowflake and things like that. How does Power BI stack up to competitors?
Yeah, they're directly competing with some of these guys, like especially Click and Tableau. They're competing a little bit with other Microsoft products like Excel and reporting services. But ultimately, the thing that they're trying to do here is overcome a weakness that they saw, that Microsoft saw in this space. And one of the best examples of this, unfortunately, I teach and I use this other product as well, so I'm not trying to slam them, but OBIEE, the Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, it's in a lot of businesses, it's being used for a lot of data. They have not significantly updated their interface in what feels like 5-10 years. So doing things like resizing an image requires going into a setting and changing the width and height in pixels. And people are expecting drag and drop. They expect to be able to make it look like something and do it right now. So the fact that there were tools out there that were enterprise level and were just so outdated created an opportunity here. Tableau, they are keeping up. Qlik, they are keeping up. And the fact that Microsoft is competing with them winds up being great for us, for all of us, because that competition means that they're constantly updating their stuff and making cooler, better things for us. But on the negative side, tools like Tableau and Qlik have a larger upfront cost, both in terms of dollars and in terms of learning curve. You have to really get through some training to be able to use Tableau effectively. Whereas with Power BI, you could start experimenting with it and then take some training later when you want to do more advanced things.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, cool. So are there any other features you want to talk about, or do you want to just get into showing us some stuff?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm going to just briefly discuss this visual with you because it helps to explain what all's going on. Um, what we're doing with a tool like Power BI, and this really does apply to others like Qlik and Tableau as well, is we're trying to take data from various sources that weren't generally designed to work together and combine them to generate new types of information to make business decisions. And we're trying to put that in front of people who are not technical. So on the bottom here, the 1-2 area here, we're looking at data that's being consumed on a local person's machine in Excel or in Power BI desktop, and they're sucking this data in from all kinds of sources. They've got text files or CSVs, they've got SQL Server and Oracle databases, they've got SharePoint information, they have FTP sites where vendors are sending them information like XML or JSON files, and there are web services that they're connecting to. These were not all designed to work together. And sometimes, even worse, we have one kind of data, like say sales or accounting data. We have 10 or 15 years of history with it, but those 15 years of history are across 3 different products that the company used. So the data is 15 years of history, but it's in 3 separate data sources that weren't designed to look like each other. How do we combine that stuff to learn about what's happened over that 15-year time when they came from such different types of sources? So what Power BI is going to give us is a way of pulling that stuff into this desktop and playing with it, creating a model that combines that data. And I'm going to show you how we do this in a simplified demo here in a minute. And then once we're done and we think, wow, this is actually really useful, we can publish it to this cloud-based service, and we can secure it so that anyone within the organization who needs to see it has access to it. And we can do some really beautiful visualizations. And if the people who are hitting it are somewhat technical, right from inside of that web interface, we can empower them to make changes to how those reports work. So they can go in and they can filter and group and do things like that. But they could also build brand new reports from scratch using the data that we published, all from the web interface. So there's a lot of power in being able to share this information now across the entire organization. Folks who are less technical can hit a dashboard and get a quick understanding of what's going on with the health of the business. Folks who are more technical, they can go in and they can generate all kinds of reports. And folks who are data centric can also export the data right from Power BI and explore it inside of Excel. So if they're comfortable in Excel, we can move them back and forth between these environments seamlessly. So let me give you a quick demonstration of that. So what I have here for you is a blank, empty Power BI interface. Nothing going on, nothing up my sleeve. This is just what you get when you create a brand new Power BI document. And I've got 3 files that we're going to play with. The first one has to do with sales, and that file is an Excel spreadsheet. So from the ribbon here, which is designed to look a lot like the Office ribbon, so the people who are familiar with Office are not going to be completely freaked out, we can go in here and we can edit data, we can enter data, we can get data. I'm going to go and get some data from Excel. And the one that I want is this one called sales. And it looks at that Excel spreadsheet and it says, I see a sheet in that Excel spreadsheet called sales. Do you want that? It gives me a preview so I can see whether it seems to be doing the right thing. And then I can load that data. If you have a large amount of data, if this is hitting something like SQL Server, we also have the ability to connect it directly so that instead of it importing the data like we just saw, it would instead connect to the data, and when we run our reports, it would query the database But as it stands right now, what it just did is it made a copy of that Excel spreadsheet inside of Power BI. When we publish, it's this button right here, we will be publishing that copy. What that means is if somebody changes the underlying Excel spreadsheet, we would have to refresh it and republish it. But if we don't want to do that every single time the Excel changes, we have to come up with a better strategy. And that's again where this little slide comes in handy. We can make a gateway inside of our environment that allows Power BI's web interface to connect directly inside of our firewall to our databases or even to our Excel spreadsheets. We could also take this a slightly different direction, take that Excel spreadsheet and host it on the cloud by putting it in OneDrive or in a SharePoint site, and then we can connect Power BI to it directly. And when we do that, as soon as someone makes a change to the Excel spreadsheet, Power BI immediately becomes aware and re-imports the changes so that all of our reports are up to date and people are seeing the latest version of the data. So pretty cool stuff. Let's take a look at that data. Ta-da. Doesn't get too much easier than that. I'm noticing some things though. Product ID, it has decided that that is a number. And the way I know that is from the justification of the columns. Things that are left justified tend to be text, right justified tend to be numbers, but they give us an entire environment for manipulating data models. And it's actually a separate interface, but it is part of the Power BI universe here. So what this is doing is giving me an icon that helps me tell what data type each of these columns is. And I can now say, look, product ID really shouldn't be a number. It's not something we do math with. So I'd like to change that from being a number to being text. And I'm going to replace it. I also think that zip code should not be a number. It's numeric, but when you treat it like a number, a bad thing happens. Zip codes that have a leading 0, like in the Boston area, it hacks off that leading 0. So I want this to be treated as text as well. The problem is that Excel already damaged this data. So as a result of that damage, even though I've corrected the assumption it made about the data type, we're still going to see instances where the 0 has already been removed. And normally what we would ask someone to do is maybe go back to the Excel and fix this so we can re-import it. The problem is that next month, they're going to get a new Excel spreadsheet from the vendor or whoever. They're going to re-export this data from wherever they got it from. And we're going to have the same problem. They're going to have to go and fix it again. So one of the really cool things about Power BI is when you come into this interface to make changes, it scripts each of the things it does as a step-by-step thing. So if I would like to change this from zip to postal, I can change this, and it actually adds a step to a script. Next time I refresh this data, it will rerun this script step by step so that anything that I've done to fix what's wrong will be done again. It'll be reapplied the next time I import this data. This makes it much more consistent for me to continue using this month after month. So my problem right now is that I've got zeros hacked off of this and I want to fix it. I could absolutely write a formula in Excel that would figure out how to do this. I could write a formula in here that would do this, but let me show you a really neat sort of AI-like feature that they have where you can add a column from an example. And the idea behind this is rather than you writing the code, you tell it what you wish the thing looked like, and then it fixes it for you. So this one is the one I want to fix. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tell it, I wish that that was 0, 6, 3, 4, 0. I wish that that's what it looked like. And it's going to look at that and figure out what to do to the rest of the rows based on that little piece of information. What it thinks I want is a 0 in front of everything, which is wrong. I only want it in front of the ones that are only 4 digits. But now what I'm going to do is tell it to fix this one to not have a 0. And watch what happens when I hit enter. It figured out from those 2 examples what my intent was. And then it replaced all these values and it shows me the code it used to do it. So if I'm somewhat technical, I can read that code and determine whether it looks like it would work for other situations that maybe we don't see on the screen right now. I can also learn how to code by reading the code that it generated and reuse that in the future. I'll just rename this column now to fixed zip. Oops.
Very cool. So anybody who really has even a basic understanding of performing like ongoing analytics probably understands the pain of kind of cleansing the data. So this seems really powerful and also amazingly simple in a way that you can actually capture your cleansing process and almost kind of automate it for future, because obviously like analytics isn't just a one-time thing, it's ongoing. And yeah, you're probably going to have new data sets coming in all the time. And so if I understand right, you can basically build your automation or at least your process steps to perform the cleansing and get more efficient over time, which is super cool.
Right. And we can do, again, we can do a lot of this stuff in Excel, but when we do it in here, we're doing it for every future import of this data we have, because it'll reapply this logic again. I can go in here and add another column, and this time I can do a little bit of math and say, I would like let's pretend that instead of this being revenue, this is the cost per unit, and this is units. I can say I would like to multiply units times revenue and call this something clever like total. And now I've got another column that's going to do a calculation. And this column will only be created when this data is imported. So I didn't have to change the data that was provided to me. I'm changing it after it's been imported using a bunch of applied steps. And I can name these steps so that 6 months or a year from now, and I have to come back in here and maintain this thing, I have some clue of, I'm sorry, it's right click to do this one. I can go in and I can remember why I did that thing. So this is a thing where I fixed the zip, and this one is where I calculate the totals. So coming back in the future, I can go through this. Also, I can see step by step. You can see that those columns don't exist at this step. So if there's a problem, I can step through the code and see what each step does to determine whether the thing it did is appropriate.
That's awesome.
So I'm happy with this. I'm going to close it. It'll warn me, hey, do you want to save that? Yep. And then it is going to re-import the data, and it's going to reapply all of that code to the data that's bringing in. And now I've got my new columns. So let's do it again. Let's pull in a CSV this time. This is going to be a text file, and the file is products. So since this is a CSV, we may have a slightly different interface because it wants to know what's the delimiter, but it's still picking off the column headings. It's still looking at the columns and giving you a demonstration of that. I'm going to load that in. All right. Again, I'm concerned about the data types being managed a particular way, but notice that product is left justified. Zip is left justified. This one's been fixed. This is the sales. Let's go now to our demo products. Product is right justified. Manufacturer ID, usually IDs are numeric, but they're not numbers. You wouldn't do math with them. They're actually something that we should probably treat as text. So without going into that edit queries interface, we can actually do simple steps right from here if we want to by clicking on modeling and specifying the data type from here. It does the same job. I tend to use the other interface because I tend to do a lot of things all at once, and I want it to do all of those things. So it's easier because there are more features in that other interface. But if I just want to do some simple things like this, piece of cake, I've corrected those two things. I feel good about that. And again, next time I pull this data in, it will know to reapply those changes to those two columns. But wait, there's more. It would be really great if when I pulled up my sales, instead of seeing the product ID, I could see the name of the product. And now I have two different tables. What I needed to do is create a join between these two. And one was an Excel spreadsheet and the other was a CSV. So you can't do relationships between files like that in a database. You can in a relational database, but I want that. So we have an interface right here that allows us to now simulate that. What we're doing is we're saying, you have imported this data, and when it did it, it actually transformed them to a data type that is common. So numeric fields that came from Oracle and numeric fields that came from SQL, if you try to touch directly against them, they often have weird idiosyncratic behaviors because the data types aren't really identical in the way they're stored. In here, it's homogenizing them so that now, even though these came from two completely different types of file, I can drag product ID to product ID. And since I told it to treat them both like text, it's going to say, okay, well, they're close enough to the right data type. I can see that this is a one-to-many relationship. And I can handle that. It doesn't change anything that we see here. But what it's going to change is I can now create a visualization. So visualizations are pretty things we do to our data to help people understand what's going on. And I'm going to start off by I'm not choosing a visual right now. I'm just going to tell it what I want to see. I would like to see, for example, the revenue and the name of the product. So it made some assumptions about what would make that look good, and it did its best. And we can now say, that's all right, but I think it would look better a different way. Let's try it a couple different ways. And we can experiment with this without having any real understanding of how this works. We can start experimenting. We can get a much deeper understanding because there's a lot of settings and things that we can influence in here. But from a getting started standpoint, folks can get started and do really useful things with very little experience. If we want to actually see this as table data, we can do that as well. So the way that this is handling the interface and the data, I didn't have to explicitly do a join to make this work. All I had to do was demonstrate that the two had a relationship and use components from those two tables, and it figured out it must mean the name of the product grouped, summing up the revenue. Now, if what I really want to know is the average, I can actually do that. I can say this revenue, that was a really good idea, but I sure do wish that instead of showing me the revenue as a sum, that it showed me the revenue as an average, and I can change it. And if I want to change my visual now based on that, I can do that as well. So we've got this super fast way for people to change their mind about how they're going to use the data with instant feedback. And this allows them to really do some cool experiments. Now, what if the thing I'm really curious about, though, is how this works by manufacturer? We have the manufacturer name right here. So I'm going to add in manufacturer, and I'm going to remove the name of the product. So now we're seeing it by manufacturer, but the scale is really kind of a mess because certain ones have such a large scale compared to the others. So we might want to, again, change which type of visualization we use for this to help understand it better. And this kind of interface change that we can really quickly implement, it's pretty powerful. Someone comes to me and they say, this is useful, but you know what I'd really love to do? I'd love to filter by manufacturer and see which products for that manufacturer are doing well. All right, let's go back to product again. And that's a mess. So let's look at the biggest, best ones, because that's probably what they're interested in. I'm going to move this over a little bit. I'm going to add another type of visualization in here. This thing is called a slicer. And Excel actually has slicers as well that you can use when you're doing Power Pivot. But in here, what I can do is say the slicer is going to be a list of the manufacturers. This slicer is now going to influence the data of this visualization. So I can say, let's see what Abbas has as its best products. Let's look at FAMA. So this is a really fast way for folks to surf their data and experiment and learn things without having to necessarily be an expert.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of like where the rubber hits the road, right? Is in being able to visualize things. I mean, even just some of the more simple tools in Excel, this seems like an order of magnitude easier for somebody who may not even be an intermediate Excel user to do. And so, I mean, I can imagine that just in an hour, your typical business analyst or project manager, somebody who has access to a lot of stores of data, you know, could put together something useful that would influence decision making.
That's it. And once people have spent some time learning how to make these really work together, we can build pretty sophisticated interfaces that include things like navigation. Now, what we're seeing here again is this is a simulation of what it would look like if it was published, People can use it in Power BI desktop like this as it is, but if they hit this publish button, all of this becomes now a web interface-based way for the whole organization to access this data with permission so that we can secure which folks are allowed to do which things or see which things. And from here, we have the ability to let them limit, filter, all of these things across multiple reports and multiple components. We can move through a whole bunch of these and tell a story about our data that helps people better understand what's going on. And then we can even animate that by taking things that have a time component and demonstrating over time how this thing works. And it gives us an automatic animation button here. So we can monitor what's happening and trending in our data over a period of time across multiple dimensions, because we've got X, Y, and Z axis here, X and Y going left and right, and then the size of the circle representing another vector if we want, plus the color is representing a specific category. So this is a tremendous amount of depth of data that we can quickly share, along with tooltips that can be additional reports. So the tooltip itself, rather than just showing a word, can demonstrate a whole bunch of additional data. And that's a tremendous amount of richness for such a simple to get started with product.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Eric, what rich demos, and of course, got to get a shameless plug in there for our Power BI Bootcamp, which you frequently teach. That's a 3-day class. And if what you showed us here today is any indicator, then I can only imagine that this is just scratching the surface of what people.
Yeah, we teach you how to do all the things I've just done and more. And then we have some really good discussions about how to converse with your customer to figure out what their requirements are and build the appropriate thing for them.
Love it. Cool. Well, you got anything else for us today, or is that it?
That's it.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Eric, thanks for joining, and we'll have you back again to do some more of these.
Wonderful. Glad to be here.
All right. See ya.